Mr. Buckley, it's your opportunity to question Mr. Lynn.
Yeah, Mr. Lynn, I'm frankly a little bit emasculated by the approach of you and your colleagues tonight, which is really very ingratiating, and it really delights me. But it seems to me that you're conveying the impression that the evolutionist theory is other than what most people know it to be, which is materialist philosophy. Now, it's wonderful that notwithstanding your affinity for that explanation of things, you still believe in the possibility of a creator, indeed even of a Christian creator. But what would you make with the following statement, Richard Lewontin? The primary problem, he means in the current confusion, is not to provide the public with the knowledge of how far it is to the nearest star and what genes are made of. Rather, the problem is to get them to reject irrational and supernatural explanations of the world, the demons that exist only in their imagination, and to accept a social and intellectual apparatus, science, as the only begetter of truth. Now, that is the public voice, as I understand it, of the materialist evolutionists. Do you transcend it, or do you disavow it, or do you consider it inauthentic?
Well, no, I just disavow it, because I think that it is obviously possible to believe in the idea of a God who has a presence and an interest in humanity, without rejecting the overwhelming data that supports evolution and the failure of anything, Mr. Buckley, to in fact contradict it. In other words, you have picked a few squabbles with evolution, but you haven't even suggested for a moment what the mechanism is with which you would replace it.
Well, but what if one simply advances basic intelligence and says some such thing as that, in fact, a lot of monkeys turned loose over an infinite number of time would not reproduce Shakespeare? Does that sound as an arrogant rejection of random explanations for what we see about us?
No, not at all. I think that one of the great things about randomness and chance is that they are used in this process of evolution, as I personally view it, as remarkable tools within that toolbox of God's creative interest. I mean, to reject the idea that chance is something that could be used by the divine is to limit the power of the divine considerably. The divine is not sitting a bunch of monkeys in a building with a bunch of typewriters. I think we're a little more sophisticated than that, and I think that the process of evolution is far more creative than that.
I think you are more sophisticated, manifestly, by my criteria. But Richard Lewontin is a man with very substantial bona fides in your community. So if we want jointly to excommunicate him from the rational fraternity, I think we should do so piously.
Well, we Congregationalists, of course, don't excommunicate. That's one of the differences between us.
So therefore, we will do what with simply point to that as the excesses to which some nice people nevertheless go?
Well, I think, frankly, Bill, that the truth on this side is that the folks who represent the position that we've been articulating have been very good about going to conferences and trying to separate people's scientific views from their religious ones. And I wish that the other side did the same thing. And I wish fundamentally that we could understand that some questions are theological questions, others are scientific, and we work better at solving and resolving and even discussing those questions when we realize that there are two kinds of language and two kinds of issues. There's nothing extreme about that position.
You can now ask philosophical and scientific questions.
Okay,
to Mr.
well,
Buckley.
Mr. Buckley, you know, I've heard it said that even God does not know the mind of William F. Buckley. But my question is the obverse. Do you know the mind of God so well that you could rule out the possibility that God conceived evolution as the process to bring his design to fruition?
Well, I decline to answer that question because...
On what grounds?
Because my imagination is finite and the Creator's is not. Under the circumstances, I simply pass. not only for tactical reasons, but for reasons of profound belief. I do find that when I can't answer. Go ahead.
No,
go
but
ahead.
that only goes to half of the question, because the truth is that if you are saying that you cannot imagine that a God could be that creative, that imaginative, then aren't you limiting, in a very severe fashion, your construct of God? I think that's a very serious question, and I think you should have an answer after 37 books.
Because I believe that there are mysteries, and that it is impossible to parse all of God's movements by applying to them the substantially resourcelessness of our own minds. I don't, ask me a simple one. Can I account for the 5-year-old who, before we finish tonight, will have fallen in from a rooftop and be killed? No, I can't account for it. On the other hand, I don't think that the abundance of incidents of that kind are sufficient grounds for rejecting revelation.
Well, I'm not sure I would either, but I'm not sure that that addresses the question. But let's move from the theological to the scientific, which is what Michael suggested I could do. I'm trying to figure out now what it is about evolution that you find so intellectually challenging, that you reject it. Every single major scientific development over the past many decades that could have demonstrated that evolution was fundamentally flawed, every one of them proves quite the opposite. You all remember Gregor Mendel's bean experiments, and in terms of experimenting on inherited characteristics. We all studied that in high school. Carbon dating that shows that the Earth is billions of years old. Had it proved that it was very young, we would have had many evenings at the bar to discuss that. And even DNA research that shows that the DNA in chimpanzees and gorillas and humans is so close to being the same that we must have had a common ancestor. With all this evidence on one side, what line of science contradicts those powerful lines in support of our argument?
Well, what is in my judgment, has happened is a rejection of the materialist explanation of everything that has happened. At the time that Darwin spoke, he seemed to give us a facile explanation for a lot of phenomena which we couldn't otherwise explain. But I think the developments of the last 100 years have given us a perspective, and that perspective makes increasingly unrealistic the notion that there is a materialist explanation for everything that's happening around us. Remember that you're saddled with some heavy baggage. Mr. Dawkins says, we have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism.
Yeah,
well,
Mr.
we
Dawkins
don't
here, so we're not yet
prior.
Saddled with him.
Sorry?
He's not here. We are not saddled with him.
Well,
I'm just asking you a question about science,
you,
which might make you more comfortable than the questions about theology.
You better practice the excommunicative arts. Isn't that a good one?
Well, one final question. 15 years ago, before Pope John Paul II made his most recent pronouncement, he said this: "Sacred Scripture wishes simply to declare that the world was created by God." He continued, "The Bible does not wish to teach how heaven was made, but how one goes to heaven." Do you have any fundamental problem with that?
None whatever.
Well, neither do I, and I would once again offer you the same opportunity offered earlier by Michael to join this side and to separate the two kingdoms.
Thank you very much, both of you.